Church folk out there know what to do, but probably everybody else doesn't. The spirit of nonviolent justice and peacemaking is with you.
And also with you.
Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Finding Hope Through Nonviolent Peacemaking Efforts. This event this afternoon is co-hosted by the Berkeley and Jefferson County NAACP chapters. Raise your hand if you're involved with them. Wonderful, glad you're here. Also co-hosted by the Four Seasons Bookstore. Anyone from Four Seasons in here? Excellent. We love you guys. Oh my gosh. Buy anything from them. They sell all the good stuff. We want to support our local booksellers for sure. The event is also co-hosted by the Shepherdstown Friends, also known as the Quakers. Who are our Quakers here today? We love the Quakers. Thank you. We are also co-hosted by the Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church. Who from SPC is here today? Awesome. Thank you guys. Glad you're here. The event is designed to educate us about efforts and possibilities for peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and invite us to take action in our own ways toward that end. I want to make a special note about the NAACP. The Martinsburg, Berkeley, and Jefferson County chapters of the NAACP have teamed with Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church and the Friends today to plan this event. Historically, the NAACP is the oldest and largest civil rights organization in our nation. It has worked since 1909 to expand civil rights for all peoples, regardless of color, gender, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, and age group. The NAACP affirms that equality is not a charitable gift granted by the majority, but instead the NAACP holds these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal. If you want to become a member of the NAACP, you can find more information on their chapter websites. You can just Google it or use whatever alternative search engine out there that doesn't steal your data, whatever you would like. We would also like to acknowledge today there are two Nakba survivors. The Nakba is the Palestinian word for the displacement of Palestinians that happened in 1948. We have Nina Cullors and Philip Farah. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Philip? Nina and Philip, are you here today? We honor you. They are also founding members of the Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, and I'll just say I was able to join Nina for lunch and encourage you to talk to her, Nina, right here. If you are able to talk with her afterwards to hear her story, I think it would serve you well. So speaking of that, want to just say a few housekeeping items. First, I am the Reverend Gusti Newquist, the pastor of Shepherdstown Presbyterian Church, and I want to say on behalf of our congregation, it is truly an honor to welcome you, Miko, Peled, and Doug Dix, to our sanctuary this afternoon. And want to acknowledge also we are live on Facebook and want to welcome those who are joining us virtually. Again, a couple of housekeeping notes. There is one bathroom in the entryway hallway to this sanctuary on my right and your left, but fear not, we have more. If you need to use another bathroom, you can go through the double doors behind this wall here, behind the piano, and go all the way back, again, to my right and your left. Over here will be two more bathrooms. If you need them at any time, please just feel free to go ahead and get up and go. Also, I am thrilled to announce that Alfredo's Mediterranean Grill, which we all know and love in Charlestown, has offered refreshments following the service. So I think we'll be here till midnight hanging out, eating in there. Again, that will be in the fellowship hall, as well as a book signing with Miko. He has a couple of his books here and available for sale from Four Seasons. So speaking of Miko Peled, he is one of our two speakers this afternoon. He is an Israeli author and Palestinian activist, and I look forward to hearing what he means by that. He is currently living in Washington, D.C. and has recently founded Palestine House downtown in Washington. Doug Dix is our second speaker, and he is the Presbyterian Church USA Regional Liaison for Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, based in Jerusalem and Bethlehem as well, I believe. Miko and Doug will be speaking for themselves and their organizations and not necessarily representing the opinions of the co-hosts, so just want to be clear about that. There will be an opportunity for them to share their stories. In fact, the way this will unfold is I'll start by just inviting them into a conversation and asking whatever questions come up for me, and then we'll open it to the congregation. I'm sorry, I'm going to call you a congregation, to the audience, and allow you to ask questions of them as well. So and that will go on for 2 hours. But you know what? There may be so many questions that you have more. So again, feel free to talk with them after the service, after the event. I'm sorry, it's just, in there. It's just in there. As an opening prayer, we would like to welcome our speakers with a sung meditation on the web of connection between all people, offered by local musician Ardith Gilbertson. Ardith.
Is it working? Yeah. Gusti and Terry asked me to sing this song for this event, and I've been singing it since the mid-'80s when I learned it at a UN-affiliated peace camp in Legacy, Virginia. I learned it from Avi and Anat. They were living in Tel Aviv at the time, and we had a camp where 200 campers and 50 staff from around the world participated for the summer, and I worked there in the kitchen, making foods from all over the world, and also in the theater department there. And they taught me this song when Avi was singing it, and I loved it so much he helped me to write down the words. And so basically it's a peace song that they sang at the time. It's by Anatol Geffen. And the words roughly mean, if you kill me, part of me dies. And if I kill you, part of me dies. And so why are we killing each other? We need to come together and stop the killing. And we were meant to live together in peace. כשאמות משהו ממני, משהו ממני ימות בנה, ימות יתרה. כשתמות משהו ממרבי, משהו ממרבי ימות בנה. אמרה טרלה, כי כולנו, כן כולנו, כולנו מרי פרה קרת ראיה. הבנו רק מיבנו, הולך מימנו, משהו מבנו, משהו ניסה איתו. יבנו ריק מאיבנו, הולך מעימנו, מה שהוא בנו, מה שהוא ניסה איתו.
Our first speaker is Miko Peled, born and raised in Jerusalem. Miko is the grandson of someone who signed the Declaration of Independence for the State of Israel back in 1948. Around the turn of the century, Miko was driven by personal tragedy to explore Palestine. Well, hello. We have a visitor. Again, Miko was driven by a personal family tragedy to explore Palestine, its people, and their narrative. Miko's book describing that journey is called The General's Son, The Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. Educated in Jerusalem, Japan, and the United States, Miko is a professional martial artist. He holds a 6th degree black belt in karate. For 23 years, Miko operated a martial arts school that was dedicated to teaching leadership skills and peaceful conflict resolution through martial arts. In 2012, Miko sold his martial arts school and dedicated his time to writing, speaking, and activism. As founder and president of Palestine House of Freedom in Washington, D.C., his work is focused on educational campaigns toward a pathway to peace in the land of his birth, including the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and the creation of a single democracy with equal rights in all of historic Palestine. With that, I will invite Miko to our, I'm sorry, I have to call it the chancel. Miko, I would love just to hear the story of your upbringing. You were born in Jerusalem. You shared a little bit about what that was like, and just the journey of your childhood, and anything you want to share about that.
Sure. Well, thank you for hosting me here, hosting all of us here, and thank you all for coming to spend this beautiful day here to listen and to discuss Palestine. And thank you for that lovely opening. So, like you said, I was born and raised in Jerusalem to a very patriotic Zionist Israeli family. My father was a general, so in a society like Israel, which is it's an incredibly militaristic society, a general is like a god. So your father is like a god. I mean, you just say the name and everybody's like, ooh, you're the general's son. So that's why I picked that title, because it was so much growing up. That was really it was a big part of my identity. And then there were other members of my family that held very important positions within the state, the pre-state Zionist movement, and then when the state was established. And so family gatherings were like all the who's who, all around. And so I always like to say I didn't learn about Zionism from a textbook or a college course. I learned about it at the dinner table every single night, every single day. That was the conversation. Zionism, Israel, Zionism, the state, how we contribute to the state, what is happening with the state, the local politics, you name it. That was the conversation. Nothing really else mattered. And like I said, and then family gatherings, that was an extension of that. And then all the friends, my father's comrades and the comrades in arms and the other people around. I mean, that was kind of the who's who of the leadership, especially the leadership of the early years of the early decades of the state of Israel. So that's the first part of the book, which makes it very difficult sometimes for Palestinians to read, because I write it from a place where I was at the time when I was experiencing it, which made it hard for me to write as well, because I was no longer there when I was writing it. So that's really the first part of the book. And then the second part of the book, which I find more interesting, is the journey of an Israeli in Palestine, which is starting that journey, stepping away from this bubble, which is this creation, this colony that was created in Palestine and is called Israel, into Palestine. And then seeing and meeting Palestinians and realizing, or understanding, not realizing, because growing up in Jerusalem, I didn't know the word apartheid, but I saw apartheid every day. Once I started the journey, I understood very deeply that this was apartheid, that I was not born in a country called Israel. I was called in the country called Palestine, that was stolen and renamed by the Zionists. So that was kind of the big that was a big transformation, going from this place where you look up at your dad and you look up at all these people around you and you're like in awe and you feel a great sense of pride, to a place where you realize that this was all one big myth and it all fizzled away. So that's kind of the synopsis of the story.
Quite a transformation. So say a little bit about the beginnings of that transformation, when it became real for you, and where you are now. I mean, I think you've given a synopsis of that, but can you delve a little bit deeper into what was the catalyst for all of that?
So it's, I think these things start very early and gradually, and only once you look back you realize things that happened along the way that contributed to what happened, to the transformation. There's a story in my book that Palestinians relate to, especially older Palestinians, it's a story that my mother used to tell me growing up many, many times, and I didn't really understand it until I was working on the book. And she was born and raised in Jerusalem. And in 1948, when the Zionist militia kicked out all the Palestinians from West Jerusalem, the ethnic cleansing of Western Jerusalem was complete. The houses in these beautiful neighborhoods and beautiful homes were made available to Israelis. And my mother was 22, she was already a mother, and she was offered one of these beautiful homes. And she refused. Mm-hmm. At 22, you should see, if you've been to Jerusalem, anybody's been to Jerusalem, these are gorgeous homes. And she said, how can I move into the home of another mother? I take the home of a family that are now refugees. And she was a devout Zionist. I mean, her husband was an officer already. Her father had recently signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, these are major players in the Zionist movement. But somehow she had that, instinctively she realized it was wrong. And then she would continue the story by talking about the looting that took place. The Zionist forces came and looted these beautiful homes of everything they had, and so on. And she talked about it with a lot of pain. And of course, growing up, I heard the story many times. Something about it bothered me, but I didn't let it, I didn't dwell on it. Later on, I realized it was bothering me because it negated the national narrative. We don't steal homes and kick people out, they do. We were defending ourselves, so how does this story fit? Then later on, my father, when he retired from the military, he started talking about, or even before he retired from the military, actually, at the very end of the 1967 war, he was one of the architects and the and one of the generals who executed that war and pushed very hard for it. And again, calling it a war might be a little bit misleading. It was more of a brutal attack by Israel against its neighbors than a war. And we can talk about that later if you want. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a 6-day war, it was a 5-day war. But in the Jewish scriptures, 6 days of creation, the miracle of 6 days is so prominent that they decided to call it a 6-day war. But anyway, the very last day of the war, he stood up and he talked about the need to make peace with the Palestinians based on what we know today as the two-state solution. So the second part of his life was dedicated to that, mm-hmm. this idea of a two-state solution. So, I had all these things in my life as I was growing up that I had a bit of a head start. I heard the word Palestinians at home, suddenly. Nobody else talked about Palestinians. They're called the Arabs of Israel. And then I think big transformations happen to us, sadly, as a result of big tragedies. Big tragedies force us to rethink and re-examine everything we know and believe. And in my case, like you said, it was the death of my sister's daughter in a suicide mission in Jerusalem. So that was the catalyst. That was the thing that drove me to really start searching and understanding and learning and, and eventually engaging with Palestinians, but that was here in the United States. So even though I was born and raised in Jerusalem, and of course there are Palestinians in Jerusalem that I could never meet because it's so segregated, this happened here in the United States, and this process of meeting Palestinians and engaging, and I said this last night, I came into the setting was what was called a Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group, or living room dialogue. And Jewish-Palestinian is a very strange way to frame it, because there are no issues between Jews and Palestinians. The issues between Israelis or Zionists and Palestinians. But that was the framing, and I came in very happy to engage. It was at the home of a Palestinian who was still a very good friend. And I came in from a place of, I know everything about this issue. Nobody can tell me anything about this issue that I don't know. My family, look at my family history. And these perfectly nice people were telling me that day is night and night is day. Mm-hmm. And what do you do with that? So any other Israelis that attempted these meetings left immediately and said, "Oh, these people are all liars." Several Jewish people also listened to what was going on and said, "No, you can't believe these people." And the dialogue idea was that everybody just tells their story. There were no accusations. Nobody ever pointed a finger at me. And I thought, they can't all be liars. They couldn't have all conspired to sit here and lie to me about what happened to them. So I began my own investigation, my own reading, my own research, and it turned out that, and the reading that I did, which is interesting, at the time, several Israeli historians began to rewrite what happened in 1948. So Ilan Pappé, who later wrote The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and some of these others, this was before he wrote it, but he already had other works in Avi Shleim. And of course, when a Palestinian says something, we can't believe them because they're probably lying, but an Israeli Jew of German descent said it, then of course, it must be true. Mm-hmm. And so that was, and even the Palestinians were quoting them, were quoting Ilan Pappé. But anyway, so I realized that here we are, and these people are actually telling the truth, which means that what was told to me my whole life was a lie. Because the differences are not small. It's not a difference in nuance. It's the difference of night and day. You either accept that it's day or you accept that it's night, And so that was a difficult transition, and thanks to the generosity and the hospitality and the tolerance and acceptance of the Palestinian community, I was able to make that transition without losing my mind, because I had to let go of my identity. Identity, and I was thinking about that, it's true, I think, here in the United States. Our identity is connected to the story of the creation of our of the country, of the state, So if they told me about the creation of the state is a lie, it's not a story of heroism, it's a story of tragedy and terrorism, then where do I stand in this, So that was very helpful to have such a very supportive community of Palestinians to allow me to take the time I needed and do whatever I needed to get to that point. And so anyway, I'm eternally grateful to them for that. And then I began going, when I would visit Palestine, I would call it Palestine. And I invite everybody to start calling it Palestine, because that is the name of the country. The whole Israel-Palestine, it doesn't do it justice. I mean, it only legitimizes the crime of stealing Palestine, I think. But I would visit, and then I would engage with Palestinians more and more, and meet Palestinians more and more, and that was kind of my activism. My activism began, and here I am.
And here you are. So you've said a lot of provoking things, and I'll invite you to probe them a little bit more. Provoking, perhaps, not for you, but for a broader audience. I think I want to start with the fact that you said early on in your comments about your upbringing that apartheid was all around you, but you didn't know to name it that. Can you describe what you mean by that specifically?
So when you drive through the highways, we drive through the highways up and down the country, you see the Israeli towns and cities, and they're modern and modern looking and Western looking and so on. And then you see the Palestinian towns, and they're dusty and they're falling apart, and there are no sidewalks, no playgrounds, no parks. And the assumption is, what I was taught, and then the assumption is, and I hear this from people who visit, is, obviously one side is civilized and advanced and educated and, know how to do things, and the other side is just primitive because they're Arabs. So, I mean, what do you expect? Growing up and living in Jerusalem, you see it anytime you try to cross from one side to the other, which you never really do unless maybe go to the old city as to look around or something, but you never go into a Palestinian neighborhood. But if you have to, for some reason, drive through, you see that right away. Their schools are different, their clothes are different, their language is different. There are no connections whatsoever, except for very, very rare occasions that the kids meet or the two populations meet. And like I said, no sidewalks, no playgrounds, schools falling apart, overcrowded in class. I mean, everything is different. And again, the assumption is, what do you expect? We're capable. We came from Europe, and we made the desert bloom. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from this very deep, racist idea, Eurocentric place. And my grandparents certainly felt that way, and even my parents to a very large degree, and the surrounding, the environment I grew up in, that was the attitude. Look at what we did in just such a short period of time, and they've been here all these years, and look, they're not even capable of having a proper sidewalk. What the backstory is that you learn later on, if we're talking about the most basic thing, water. What people don't know, and unless you really look into it, you're not going to know, that all the water in the country is controlled by a government agency called Mikorot. They control all the water and the distribution. Palestinians throughout the entire country are allocated 3% of the water. Palestinians throughout the entire country, and today Palestinians are the majority of the population by about 1 million. They are allocated 3% of the water. Well, that explains a lot. That explains a lot. So, and then, and if you've been, can I see a show of hands who's been to Palestine? Even if you call it Israel? Okay, thanks. So, Palestinian neighborhoods are like across the street from Israeli neighborhoods. Across the street, literally. Sometimes a Palestinian town, village is here, and an Israeli settlement is literally across the street. And the ingenuity it takes to enforce this water segregation, this water racism, when they're across the street. Can you imagine the kind of engineering you have to develop in order to be able to do that? But one side gets water maybe 7 hours per week. And the others get water. Growing up, I never thought about water.
Right.
You need to water the lawn, you water the lawn. You take a shower, you take a shower. You want to drink, you drink. It's not an issue. There's plenty of water. Later on, when I started visiting and staying with Palestinians at their homes and so on, you realize it's not the case. It's a very, very precious thing, and you have to be very careful with it. So those are the kinds of things that I saw but didn't understand, and then once I got into it, I understand. So the water is one example. Mm-hmm. Then there's freedom of movement. I can drive anywhere I want, and I do. I take a car and I drive everywhere. I leave my Palestinian friends where they are, in many cases, and they can't come with me. I have a story, a good friend of mine, his name is Bassem Tamimi. His daughter became very famous. Ahit, she's the girl with the big blonde hair. She slapped a soldier a few years ago and went to jail. But he and I have been friends for many years. And I came over, and they live in a small village called Nabi Saleh. Beautiful village, beautiful place. And I came and I brought him a watermelon. Just, I came to visit and whatever. And he looked at the watermelon and he was visibly upset. He says, I can't visit you and bring you a watermelon. I mean, something as simple as that. He said, I can't visit you and bring you a watermelon. He can't visit me. It's a half-hour drive. I mean, it's more depending on checkpoints and all that nonsense, but if there wasn't a checkpoint, it's a half-hour drive, 20-minute drive.
Say more about the checkpoints for folks who may not have been there.
So that requires a little, background. So the way Palestine is governed, and again, when I say Palestine, I mean the entire country, what some people like to call Israel, but I believe it's all, and I can talk about that too if you want me to, a little more, explain why I do that. It's governed, the Palestinians are governed by different bureaucracies depending on where they live. So the government of Israel, the state of Israel, governs the entire country, all of it. Nobody moves, nobody's born, nobody dies without the knowledge and the administration of the Israeli government. Israelis can live anywhere they want. And they live under the same civil laws and have the same rights. If Israelis decide to start a settlement in somewhere, I don't know, not that, it's a small country, so it's funny to say somewhere that's, out of the way, but let's say in the desert, in Naqab, I don't know. Immediately there'll be water, there'll be roads, there'll be electricity, there'll be security, there'll be everything you need. Palestinians don't. Palestinians live in towns that have no water, no electricity, no roads, and certainly no security for them, and no rights. Now, there's an area in Palestine that is referred to as the West Bank. I take issue with that name because it no longer really exists. There's no West Bank anymore. If you look at old maps or maps of Palestine, there's like a little shape on the eastern side, and it's called the West Bank. Because when Israel was established, they decided there was going to be a part of Palestine that they were not going to control. And they just took a piece of paper or a map and a pencil and drew it and said, this is going to be the border. And then in 1967, they took it. So after about 19 years, they took it. And then within that area now, there are lots of Israeli towns and cities. They call them settlements, but these are like massive cities and towns and shopping malls and all that. And within that space, there are these, what I would refer to, I think best described as ghettos of Palestinians. What Israelis like to call enclaves of hostile population. For them to travel from place to place, they go through checkpoints that are either operated by the military or operated by security contractors, depending on the place. And they can't go from place to place, and their IDs are checked, and some places they can go, some places they cannot go. So there's all these, so Palestinians, for example, so going back to my story about Nabi Saleh, it's in what used to be called the West Bank. They can't travel to Jerusalem. They need to, and there's a checkpoint, there are several checkpoints actually that you go through between the village and Jerusalem. I drive straight through. But they can't, they're not allowed to. If they show, you have to stop, they'll have to stop, show their ID. Once they see that their ID is Palestinian, then they'll be sent back. And it gets even more complicated than that. The details of these bureaucracies, you can never finish explaining them because they're so complicated. But that's what checkpoints are. So, if I want to drive, like I said, anywhere in the country, I can just go straight, across, up, down, diagonal, I can do whatever I want. Even when there are checkpoints, because I'm an Israeli, I can drive right through. Palestinians can't. They get stopped, they get sent back. They have to deal with all these issues, and they have to have special permits, and even having the permit doesn't mean that they can go through necessarily, and so on and so on. So again, and this is just describing what happens in the West, in that area. If we talk about other areas of Palestine, Palestinians have different restrictions that they have to live under, different bureaucracies. And again, depending on where they live, their lives are governed by different Israeli bureaucracies.
So just to clarify, that I know you don't want to use the term West Bank, but just for the sake of clarity, even within the West Bank, Palestinians have to go through checkpoints to get between villages in the West Bank.
Yes.
Right. So
Between a Palestinian town to a Palestinian town, you need to go through several checkpoints, if you're allowed to go at all. Because sometimes the checkpoints are there to stop them from going anywhere they want. So for example, during the Jewish holidays, and now we're kind of on the tail end of the Jewish holidays, the checkpoints are closed. Palestinians are prohibited from entering Jerusalem. Palestinians are prohibited from travel anywhere. They are stuck in Hebron, in anywhere, except for maybe Ramallah, everywhere. But they can't travel anywhere because the checkpoints are closed. So 3.5 million people are under curfew as long as the Jewish holidays go on.
So then the next very provocative thing that you discussed was the creation of the state altogether. And I don't want to speak for everyone here, but my sense is that the prevailing narrative in the United States is out of the Holocaust and the horror of the Holocaust, which our nation bears some responsibility for, in Christianity in general, Western Christianity at least, bears enormous responsibility for. And so there's the sense that I think among most American Christians that the creation of the State of Israel is compensation for the Holocaust. That might not be the word that most people would use, but there's sort of this guilt that is assuaged maybe among Western Christians that this was sort of required out of the Holocaust. Can you speak to that? And you used, again, the term ethnic cleansing, which is, again, quite controversial in our country. How did you get to that point, and how do you change that? How do you understand the narrative differently?
Okay, that's a lot of
no
questions.
Big one, not
you
a
have
big
a lot
at
of
all.
questions here. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, ethnic cleansing, like I said, the person who put out the word ethnic cleansing was Ilan Pappé, a wonderful Israeli historian who is referred to as a new historian because he rewrote what happened, and he rewrote the story of the creation of the State of Israel. And the way he did it, he and one or two other Israeli historians, what they did was when they went into the Israeli archives after they were opened up and took a look at the documents that describe what took place when the State of Israel was established. And they came out and they said this was a well-planned, well-executed campaign of ethnic cleansing with massacres that are still being uncovered today, some almost 80 years later. And it basically was a horror show. So, and again, like I said, Palestinians have been telling these stories and talking about this long before Ilan Pappé did, but we can't believe Palestinians because, they're probably lying. An Israeli, a German Jew is probably telling the truth. That's the reality in which we live. But there's no question today that there was a well-planned, well-thought-out campaign of ethnic cleansing that started the planning started long before the Holocaust. It had nothing to do with the Holocaust. The planning of the ethnic cleansing was put down, like I said, long before the Holocaust. It had nothing to do with the Holocaust. And they prepared for it, and they armed themselves, and then they executed it. In fact, as soon as, some of you may know this, but in November of 1947, the United Nations came up with this insane plan called the Partition Plan. And if you ever look it up and you see the map that the UN came up with, I always say that whoever drew the map must have been completely drunk or heavy on, or stoned or something, because it's an insane map. And there was no way there was no way in the world that map could have ever materialized into a reality. And basically, what that plan did is it allocated the majority or the larger portion of the country to a Jewish minority that lived in Palestine at the time, maybe 500,000 Jews or something. And the smaller portion of the country to the majority, which was far larger as a majority, were Palestinians. And it was convoluted, and there were little enclaves here and there, and it was chopped up. It was insane. So this was November 29th, 1947. By the end of December, the ethnic cleansing campaign already began. Tens of thousands of Palestinians had already been kicked out of their homes, their villages destroyed. And then it went on and on and on and on till about, officially it ended around February 1949, but it went on into the early 1950s, where villages were just destroyed and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were thrown out. That's why you have all these refugees in the Gaza Strip. Where did they come from? They came from the southern part of Palestine that was very populated. People say the Naqab is a desert. They call it the Negev, is a desert. It was very heavily populated. It's very heavily populated today by Palestinians. There are over 300,000 Palestinian Bedouin who live in that part of the country. But they live in towns that are not recognized, so they're never on any map. And they don't have electricity or water or anything. So ethnic cleansing, yes, it was a campaign of ethnic cleansing. 90% of the Palestinian Bedouin living in the Naqab were gone. You know, the vast majority of Palestinians were thrown out of their homes, out of their lands, cities were taken, villages were burned, massacres, like I said, some are still being unfolded today. I won't get into details unless you want me to. The cities of Jaffa and Lid, the city of Jaffa on the coast, on the ashes of which much of Tel Aviv was built. The city of Lid, where the Israeli airport is. I mean, it was all taken. West Jerusalem, and so on. So ethnic cleansing is what it was. Now, the Holocaust reference is very interesting. It keeps coming up in two ways. One is to, like you said, well, because there was a Holocaust, Jews deserved a state of their own, and therefore they got it. Well, why do the Palestinians have to suffer because of the Holocaust? How does that even make sense? How is it a proper response to the genocide of the Jews in Europe to commit these horrendous crimes against the Palestinian people? What kind of an equation is that? And I can tell you a little story, testimony that I made I co-produced a documentary about a Jewish Holocaust survivor who talks about this. So that's one side. The other side is people say, well, how could the people who suffered this do this? Which is also not true because it's not the same people. The very, very, very small percentage of Holocaust survivors went to Palestine. A fraction. And many of them left because they couldn't stand it. It was a militaristic, racist entity that was established on a country that had just been emptied of its indigenous population. Cities were, large cities, Jaffa, Lid, Askelan, Majdal, you name it, turned into ghost towns. And when the survivors of the Holocaust came, and I remember hearing this a lot growing up, the attitude was, well, they had it coming because had they been Zionists and had come to Palestine, this would not have happened to them. This was the Zionist attitude towards the Holocaust survivors. And none of the Zionists even heard of what happened, really, or cared about what happened until the Eichmann trial in 1960-61. So to say that what has been done to the Palestinians is somehow, or the responsibility for that is somehow on the Holocaust survivors, is an injustice to survivors of the Holocaust. It's a terrible injustice. Because the vast majority of them either went back home or came to America or went to other places. They did not go to Palestine. And this gentleman that I did the movie about, his name is Jacques Boudet. And he is a Belgian Jew. And his parents were killed in Auschwitz. He was saved by Belgians. He and a bunch of other Jewish children were taken to the countryside and saved by Belgians. And he says, the movie's called The Orphan. And to see him speak is very moving. And he's very outspoken anti-Zionist and very outspoken in support for Palestinians. And he has been for decades. And he said, they're telling us that because of what happened to my parents, this is him saying, it justifies doing what is being done to Palestinians. And he goes, to use the memory, he says, of my parents for this? He says the response to the Holocaust should not be the creation of this militant, racist entity. It should be humanity. It should be education. Not, 3 years after the Holocaust, 3 years after the end of the genocide of the Jews, with the Nuremberg trials and crimes against humanity that were being written, the crime of genocide, all these crimes were being written, right? 3 years later, 1948, these crimes were being perpetrated against the Palestinian people by a small group of Zionist militant racists. They stole a country, which, by the way, they did not make bloom. They stole a country in full bloom, a rich country. They stole money from the banks. They stole entire cities. They stole produce from the fields. They stole the fields. They stole the farms. They stole the ports. They stole everything. It was a country in full bloom. Universities, schools, hospitals, like I said, cities, towns, villages. They stole it all. And then they had the audacity to say, we made the desert bloom. So, now, obviously, the Zionists around the world and the Zionists, had to develop a story to make up for all this. And that's the story of the Jews returning after the Holocaust, after 2,000 years of suffering, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But it's a lie. And there are at least two books that deal with this issue. One is called Palestinian Refugees in International Law, and it deals with the rights of refugees, of the Palestinians today. There's this claim that's being put out by Trump and by many Zionists, and certainly by the State of Israel, that the case for reparations, for example, or for return, is very weak now because so many of the 1948 Palestinians have died. Legally, the reality is that the case for their return and for reparations is stronger than ever and becomes stronger and stronger with time. And this was written by jurists, so it's a very good book, and I wrote a little bit about it. And there's a new book that's coming out I believe it's called Stolen Land, and it's coming out, I think, at either the end of the year or beginning of next year. Again, it talks about, and there's descriptions of the money, of the produce, of the cities, because what's owed to Palestinians is not just the homes that were stolen, but public spaces were stolen too. Not to mention, their country was taken from them, and then a country that historically, I'm not talking about faith, I'm talking about history, historically, has been called Palestine, or variations of Palestine, Palestine, going back to the pharaohs. Every step of the way historically, that's how this country was referred to, as Palestine. Suddenly they call it Israel, and by the way, for hundreds of years, Europeans were doing business with Palestine, they were trading with Palestine, they're buying olive oil and barley for beer, all kinds of stuff, and cotton. It was a thriving economy. Suddenly on May 15th, 1948, everybody forgot. They named it Israel, and everybody has amnesia. Everybody forgot the business, the history. My grandparents came to a country they knew was called Palestine. My parents' birth certificates said Palestine. Their passports said Palestine. Their original passports said Palestine. So, we can continue to live in denial, or we can face the truth. And unless we face the truth, if we are serious, and this is a question I get a lot, how do we move on? How do we move beyond this? We have to tell the truth. We have to face the truth. That's the only way we're going to get out of it, is by understanding what has transpired. That's why I take issue when people say war or conflict. It's not a conflict. It's a genocide. There was no Jewish-German conflict. There was no Jewish-German war during World War II. It was a genocide. This is a genocide. War ceasefire, this terminology is completely inappropriate. Of course there's not going to be a ceasefire. Why would there be a ceasefire when one side is committing genocide and the other side has nothing? You know? So we have to face it, and yes, it's controversial, yes, it's, you know, I have a feeling that most of the people here, it's not that hard, they've heard this before, but, you know, it's hard to hear for people. Of course it's hard to hear. It's very difficult. Well, the truth is difficult, it's painful.
So on that note, let's hear from the community what questions you might have of Miko. And unfortunately, we only have the one microphone, so I'll need you to ask your question and I will repeat it so our online folks can hear us. Yes, in the back.
Can I ask Miko to get in depth about the United States involvement in this genocide, ethnic cleansing, please?
So the United States involvement in what has unfolded.
So the United States involvement began really around the Carter administration. That's when the big involvement began, or maybe just before that, you know, 73, 74. That's when the U.S. got involved, like, very seriously. And it progressively, the involvement became deeper and deeper and deeper, to the point where I think we have to come to terms, Americans have to come to terms with the fact, and again, talk about difficulty, the difficulty of coming to terms with the fact that unless Americans stand up and scream at the top of their lungs, stop sending weapons, stop sending money to Israel, unless, yeah, they don't think it's that controversial. Unless we say that, Americans are complicit. Silence is complicity, and people say, yes, but what about other countries? What about other issues? What about other, okay, other countries are not getting billions and billions of dollars and the most cutting-edge weapons in order to commit genocide. It's different. There is an exception here when it comes to the apartheid state. There is an exception. The American support is insanely, is absolutely insane. So as Americans, it's extremely important to stand up because the complicity is there. Who pays, so no, whose tax dollars? American tax dollar. Who is voting for the representatives that send the money? Who's voting for the politicians that send the money? Who's voting for them? Who voted them for? Well, we voted them for office. We're going to make demands. We're paying their salary. I'll take it a step further. The 6th Fleet of the U.S. Navy is in the Mediterranean. They work for us. They should liberate the Gaza concentration camp. That's what the 6th Fleet needs to do, just like the Red Army liberated concentration camps after World War II. They need to step right in, and they need to liberate the Gaza concentration camp and provide humanitarian aid immediately. They work for us. It's our tax dollars. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen unless we stand up and scream at the top of our lungs. Stop murdering Palestinians. And the end of that sentence should be, we need to replace this genocidal apartheid state, which people like to call Israel, with a free Palestine, on all historic Palestine, with equal rights. That will improve the lives of Israelis too. People say, what about Israelis? Israelis will benefit from this, even, you know, tremendously. Living in a democracy with equal rights will be very good for Israelis as well. So I think it's important to, again, go back. If anybody wants to talk about peace, I think it's appropriate. Even now, in the midst of this horror that we're seeing unfold in Palestine, it's very important to talk about Palestine, about peace. It's important to wish for peace. It's important to envision peace. But it has to be based on reality. Peace can come between Israelis and Palestinians. Peace can come to the Holy Land, to Palestine, however we choose to call it, but only by the removal of the apartheid state and replacing it with a free Palestine from the river to the sea with equal rights. That is a pathway to peace. So that's what we should all be fighting for.
Yes.
Can you speak to your position on Iran? Because we as Americans have been educated to believe that the statement by Bush, Iran is on the axis of evil. So it's always a foe. But if I hear you tonight, it sounds, I mean, to me now, I see Iran as an ally.
Well, Iran, yeah, the question of Iran is an important one, especially, given the hype about attacking Iran. Iran stands with Palestine. The Iranian government, has been standing with Palestine for a very long time. And they've been supporting the Palestinian resistance, we know that, for a very long time. That makes it a supporter of terrorism. In American, political world, that's, that makes them a terrorist state. Now, Iran has been they've been supporting the Palestinians politically and with money and so forth, but as much as they could. But I think it's important to, and they've been, and I think their response to the threats, American threats and mostly Israeli threats of attacking, their response has been measured and responsible. Israel, we saw how many, there's an estimated 200,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza over the last year. And it's impossible to find out exactly how many because nobody can take the data. Everybody's hiding because every single person in that concentration camp is affected. Nobody's safe. Nobody can sit there and start taking data. But this is a lowball estimate. Israel entered southern Lebanon. Within days, there were hundreds civilians dead. When Iran attacked, and it was interesting, I was doing an interview with a Palestinian friend in Jerusalem for the Palestine House of Freedom YouTube channel. And as we're talking, we hear the sirens and these booms, and I said, look at your phone, what's going on? He's looking at his phone, he's going, Iran just launched missiles, and they were landing right as we were speaking. So they hit military targets. It was measured. It was responsible. I think one person was killed, but it was, not directly from that. So who is the terror state here? Who is the one who is destabilizing the region? Who is the one that's spreading the war? Iran? No. Now, I think both Israel and the U.S. know that the fact that Iran is behaving in such a responsible way should not be mistaken for weakness. Nobody wants a war with Iran. They know that a war with Iran would be horrendous. And so I think that's why the responses have been kind of measured on both ends. But the demonizing Iran is done only because they are supporting the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance. They don't, that's what it's about.
I'm going to take one more question. This woman right here, yes.
I'm wondering whether there are any people who are listening to your message in Israel. What is the Israeli response? Your own family. How do they feel about this message that obviously is being well received by a portion of the United States citizens? Are there no Israelis who hear your message?
Well, to say there are no Israelis might be an exaggeration, but there are very, very few.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I
Yeah.
need to repeat the question. Thank you. Just to summarize, the question was, how are Israelis responding to Miko's message?
I mean, the Israeli response can be seen in the results of the Israeli elections. Israelis vote in high numbers, and you look at the makeup of the Israeli House of Representatives and the government, and that tells you everything. Public opinion is behind this genocide 110%. There is no dissent in the papers. From time to time, Gideon Levy writes an article, but there is no dissent in the media. Israeli society is behind it. what used to be some kind of the strange creation, which is used to be called the Israeli left or the Zionist left. They're all behind. They're all lined up supporting this now, because you can't be a Zionist left. It's like you can't be a fascist left. You're either one or the other. You can't be a racist left. It doesn't work. If you're a Zionist, then that's it. It's an inherently racist, genocidal ideology. Like I said, I didn't learn about this in a textbook or in a college course. So Israeli society is supporting this, by and large. Of course, there are always a few individuals here and there who try to speak out, but it's very dangerous to speak out now. Very, very dangerous to speak out. Palestinians don't even dare text or post. I have friends, many friends, who have been arrested since October 7th. Not for the first time. They've been arrested many, many times. But they come out of prison after 6 months, 8 months, a shell of their previous selves. I have 2 friends that lost 30 kilos, and there wasn't much of them to begin with, because there's no food. They are in cells with 10, 11 other guys, and they never get to go outside, so they don't walk. They never see the sunlight. The smallest infraction or the smallest complaint, they beat them, torture them, and bring in dogs into the cells. Now, when they are released, they are warned not to talk. And they are sent back to jail for something as simple as sharing a post on social media. They are sent right back to jail. So it's, no dissent is allowed. And even Palestinians, they don't dare text each other. They are living under, they've always lived under a reign of terror, but now it's a whole new level of terror.
One final question from me, sorry. There will be a reception after where you can follow up. We titled this event Finding Hope in Nonviolent Peacemaking Efforts. And I'm wondering if there is anything you can offer that would be a sign of hope.
Yes.
Yes.
First of all, look around the room. Look around you. This is hope. And I do this all the time, and everywhere I go, you see rooms filled with people that care enough to spend a beautiful day indoors talking about this. And so that's hope. Besides that, I would say 2 more things. One is that hope is something we create. It's not a static thing. We create hope. So what does hope look like? Everybody has to make up their mind. I know what hope looks like. In my opinion, hope looks like a free Palestine, an all-historic Palestine with equal rights. That, to me, is hope. So, to me, that's what I'm fighting for. And I know exactly when I get up in the morning, this is what I'm fighting for. Otherwise, I'd lose my mind seeing what is happening in Palestine over the last, particularly over the last year. So we need to, every single person needs to identify the hope and fight for it. And remember, there's not going to be a savior. There's no savior. The saviors are all sitting in the room here. This is it. In Arabic, you refer to Salah ad-Din. There's no Salah ad-Din. We are all Salah ad-Dins. We are all the saviors. This is it. And, I'm certainly not somebody who engages in violence or anything like that, but I think it's important to remember that when we talk about nonviolent approach, the Palestinians are on the receiving side of the violence. And many times what happens when we talk about nonviolence, people are looking at Palestinians and demanding it of them as though what Palestinians are doing is violent. And so I always like to remind people, yes, nonviolence is very, very important, but we need to look at the perpetrators of the violence. And that is the apartheid state, which is receiving all these billions of dollars and all these weapons from this country. So just to make clear where the violence is and who we need to be addressing when we talk about that. But I think there is hope. If we create it and if we fight for it, then of course there's hope. The place we opened in Washington, D.C., the Palestine House of Freedom, it's right on Capitol Hill. It's on Pennsylvania Avenue, and there's a Palestinian flag on Pennsylvania Avenue for the first time ever. And so everybody's welcome to come visit. Everybody's welcome to come talk, help us out, figure out, what we need to do and how to do it better. And it's become a place where people do congregate. And so every group, every organization you can think of, peace group and from Code Pink to Students for Justice in Palestine and on and on and on. Everybody's coming over, everybody's congregating, everybody's using the space. If you want to help by volunteering, you can do that. If you want to help by donating, you can do that. If you want to help because you have a great idea, you can do that. And that is hope. It's clearly providing hope to a lot of people, having that space there and doing that work. So you're all welcome to come visit.
Thank you so much. Can I get a round of applause? Thank you, thank you, thank you. No. We're going to move on. We're going to move on to our next speaker and ask Miko to sit down. And Sam, if you wouldn't mind just playing a little something while we're moving folks around. And Doug, come on up, and we'll get you some water. And if anyone needs to take a little bathroom break, go ahead and do that, and we'll regroup here in about 2 minutes. Huh? No, I'm fine. I think they might need to, that was a lot to process. I'm going to get us back together, friends, and invite us to take a seat now. Make one or two final comments, and we'll gather back in the pews. I know we have a lot to digest from what Miko shared, and we have one more speaker to share even more, so even more to digest. I want to, with great gratitude, and again, honor and pride, I would say, as a Presbyterian pastor, welcome Doug Dix. Doug was born and raised right here in the Shenandoah Valley as a member of the Buckton Presbyterian Church in Front Royal. For those SPC folks, you will be interested to know that Doug has experienced Randy Tremba as an interim pastor at Buckton way back in the day. And the last time he was here was for Randy's wedding. So here we are, many decades later. Doug graduated from James Madison University with degrees in anthropology and archaeology, and he has served the National Church for 25 years as a mission co-worker in Jerusalem, and I think he lives in Bethlehem. And his current title is Regional Liaison for Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. For decades, the Presbyterian Church USA has promoted a just peace in the Middle East. Central to our Middle East Peace Initiative is the promotion of human values and human rights for all people. We stand alongside Palestinians in their quest for peace and in the hope that the long-standing Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza might end. And Doug will share with you a little bit more about how the denomination arrived at those statements. The church advocates for the rights of Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries, free from threats or acts of force. And again, Doug will share a little bit more about how he arrived to his work in this part of the world and how he advises the denomination in our social witness policy and how the last year has been for him in his work. Please welcome Doug Dix. So Doug, the same way, this is for you, the same way that I started with Miko's, just personal background and how he landed where he is. How did you, Virginia boy from Front Royal, end up in Bethlehem and the journey, how you got there?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me with you today. I'm actually not born in the Shenandoah Valley. I was born in Baltimore, but my parents were from the Shenandoah Valley. So I'm a Virginian by heart, and I say by birth.
Yes.
They say if your mother was a Virginian, you're a Virginian. So
I'm
right?
a Virginian.
And I was just sharing with Miko over at the end of the meal we just had that my great-great-grandfather used to drive the stagecoach between Winchester and what was then called Snickersville. It's now Bluemont. Yeah. And another great-grandfather was from Martinsburg, and he was a brickmaker, and it was said that he helped to lay the streets of Martinsburg, West Virginia. So I've really come home, and it's good to be here.
That's right.
But I went to college with Palestinians. That's where I met the first Palestinians, and I actually thought they were Mexicans until we got to talking, and they told me their story. And again, the story that they were telling me was drastically different from what I thought I knew and what I'd been told and what I'd read about Israel and Palestine. And that piqued my interest. And so I had a chance to go and visit in 1982 following Israel's war on Lebanon. And again, the same sort of stories were coming out, and I thought, why have I never heard this before? And this really was the beginning of my indoctrination into what actually happened leading up to 1948 and subsequently since then. So that was really my first interest. I went back to Jerusalem as a student at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for 3 consecutive summers studying archaeology, Arabic, and history. and then came home and got a job with the airline industry and went back to my life and sort of put that on hold. But then I said I wanted to serve the church at some point in my life while I was healthy and my parents were still healthy and in relative good health. So I made the decision to apply for mission service for the Presbyterian Church. And now I'm in the 25th year of a 2-year commitment.
Right. That's how following God goes, right? Yeah. So did you choose to end up in Jerusalem, or did they choose to send you there?
I did. Actually, there was a job description when I asked about mission service, and the job description was to host and escort visiting church groups, to introduce them to the indigenous communities, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, this job has my name written all over it. I could do this. And at some point there was a twist, and they were going to send me to Egypt. And I was a bit disappointed, but I said, well, if I'm willing to give up 2 years, and I've already given notice for my job, I think I have to do where the Lord leads me. And it was while I was in mission training that I got a notice under my door saying, you didn't know this, but after you left for Chicago, there was a flurry of activities and emails about your position, and long story short, you're going to Jerusalem. I hope you're happy.
And were you?
And I was, and I
Yes,
still am.
And you still are. So tell me about, you described that the job description was to introduce visiting groups from the U.S. to indigenous Christian communities. How did that go, and how is it going now, and how has the work evolved?
The assignment that I was given was to work in a small office run by the Middle East Council of Churches called the Ecumenical Travel Services, which later changed its name to the Jerusalem Liaison Office of the Middle East Council of Churches. So I was working with other mission personnel from the UCC, Disciples of Christ, from the Uniting Church in Australia, and from the United Methodist Church here in the States. And keep in mind, this was 1995, September of 1995. So there was a lot of optimism because this was during the middle of the Oslo period. Peace was coming. There was going to be this mutual historic reconciliation between the two sides. And and within something like 6 weeks, 7 weeks of stepping off the plane, Yitzhak Rabin had been assassinated, the Prime Minister of Israel. So, and this, of course, was the beginning of a relatively bad period. January and February, there were suicide bombings in Jerusalem, etc. So, navigating and working in that context, it wasn't that I was being sent there to learn about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but because I was living there, you get caught up in it, and you have to know the ins and the outs of, and I can say that I learned as much from the speakers that I was able to take church groups to as they did. But of course, I was living there and spending time there. So, it was, for me, it was a classroom, and it still is.
How has your relationship with, so you were building relationships and continuing relationships with Christian communities in Israel, Palestine, and then also relating to the denomination back home. So tell me about that sort of back and forth as you are being educated there, then you're educating back among the denomination. How does that work?
Well, first let me just say that in the mid-1800s there was an agreement called the Comity Agreement, which was like a gentleman's agreement. Again, dividing up the Middle East according to where the denominations were. And the Presbyterians weren't popular, and we didn't get Palestine, and we didn't get Jordan, and we didn't end up in Israel. But we were in Lebanon, we were in Syria, we were in Iraq, and Egypt. And so if you go to those countries today, you will meet indigenous Arab Presbyterians. And some of the better institutions of higher learning, such as the American University of Beirut and the American University of Cairo, were founded by Presbyterians. I think something like in the 1830s, the first Presbyterian missionaries stepped off the boat in Lebanon. Now imagine they're missionaries coming to the Middle East, where Christianity was born, to begin work. But within 2 years, they had learned Arabic and began ministries of teaching, healing, and evangelizing. So again, because we did not have a presence and do not have a presence in what's called the Holy Land, Israel, Palestine, we partner with churches that are currently there. So the two churches we partner with are the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land, the ELCJHL, and the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, which is the Anglican Church. So those are our primary partners, and they're the churches that they're basically our address in the Holy Land.
And so I think you brought up the important point that here we have the birthplace of Christianity, and then we have missionaries coming in. So tell me about the relationship between sort of, the centuries-old Christian communities and then the sort of missionary-led communities. How does that work?
Well, in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, the Greek Orthodox Church, or what the Arab Christians call the Orthodox Church, they don't call it Greek, they call it the Orthodox Church, is the mother church of the Holy Land. And then there are 13 traditional churches going down from the Greek Orthodox, Latins, the Armenians, Armenian Orthodox, Armenian Catholics, etc. And the Protestants come at the very end.
I mean, what can you say?
I mean, the heads of churches meet on a regular basis. They convene, and they issue statements, usually at Christmas and at Easter, and then at different times during the year, particularly around issues related to what's going on with the Christian communities in the Holy Land.
So you said you didn't go there to be really active in peacemaking per se, or justice seeking per se. You got caught up in it because Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated and everything unfolded from there. How did and how do you participate in not just Christian movements for justice and peace, but more generally? What is your work in that area?
Yeah, I mean, one of the responsibilities we have is to participate in the life and the liturgy of the church. So my sponsoring church is St. Andrew's, which is the Church of Scotland. So I participate in the life and the liturgy of that church by either playing the piano on a Sunday morning, reading the scripture, going in and sitting up, whatever needs to be done. But again, we've been affected by the events of October the 7th. So we're not having a lot of tourists in Jerusalem now. We're certainly not having any tourists in Bethlehem. But still, we also want to be ecumenical as well. So I don't have to, for example, I would be at church if I was in Jerusalem on a Sunday morning at St. Andrew's, but I would also go to the Anglican church or to the Lutheran church and rotate around so that my face is seen, so that the archbishop or the bishop is seeing me, etc., etc. And again, if we had visitors, I would be taking them to those various churches on a Sunday morning. The way the Israeli tour system works is Sunday morning is meant for Masada. So you get on a tour bus and you go to Masada. And so consequently, you have a lot of Christian visitors and tourists that are not going to church and worshiping on a Sunday morning. They're not hearing the liturgy spoken in Arabic. And I was sent there at a time where we were trying to change that. In other words, we wanted to raise the awareness level of the fact that there are indigenous Arab Christians in the Holy Land, and we want to spend time with them, we want to hear their stories, and we want to be able to demonstrate Christian love and support, and so that they're not forgotten. They're often referred to as the forgotten faithful, so we want to let them know that you're not forgotten. We are here for you, we're in solidarity with you, we can pray with you, we can worship with you, etc.
So what does it mean for churches, the Presbyterian Church in particular, to be in solidarity with Christians, in Arabic Christians? And particularly, how is the Presbyterian Church doing that?
Well, one of the ways is back in December of 2010, there was a meeting and there was a convening of a group of Palestinian Arab Christians who call themselves Kairos Palestine. They issued a document And it's really a cry from the heart of the Palestinian people about their situation and their plight. Now that's been 14 years ago this year, but, and if you want to Google it, Kairos Palestine, you'll find it on the web. They're very active. They usually issue an Easter appeal, an Advent appeal, based on their current realities. And of course the Christian community is facing the loss of families. I was told recently that some 50 families left the Bethlehem area within the last year, from Bethlehem and Beit Sahur, which is the shepherd's fields. And people are very worried that, this is a brain drain on these communities. Some of your best and your brightest and your most educated people are picking up and leaving because of the hardship of the conditions, the lack of freedom of movement, no good job opportunities for their children, no good or not very good educational opportunities for their children. So this is very alarming to this community that is already being diminished by the circumstances and by and large by a lower birth rate than that of the Muslims.
So you spoke about the difficulties of the people with whom you are in ministry with. Miko described the situation as apartheid, and I know that the National Presbyterian Church has also described the situation as apartheid. Can you speak to your experience with that reality and the experience of those you work with?
It was actually at the General Assembly, which was in Louisville a couple of years ago, I think right after the COVID, and was asked to testify before the international committee that was debating that issue. And I actually gave, at the time, the definition of apartheid. Don't ask me to do it now, but I gave it then. But yes, we can officially use the word apartheid in describing the situation. In the West Bank, there are road systems that are Jewish only and Palestinian only. There are cities, towns, enclaves that are Palestinian only, and there are Israeli settlements that are Jewish only. So it really is two separate systems that are at play and that are operating in the West Bank. And since October the 7th, many Palestinians, you have to have a permit if you want to go to Jerusalem or to Israel proper from any of these enclaves. And after the events of October the 7th, most of the people who had those permits lost their jobs. So they're not able to go to Jerusalem. If they worked in a restaurant, a cafe, a bakery, if they were a day laborer actually building the settlements, they're not allowed. So thousands and thousands and thousands of people have lost their jobs because of that. And in 2002, Israel built what's called a separation barrier. We call it the apartheid wall. And people, for example, there's a wall all around Bethlehem, and there are only so many entryways and exits out of that enclave or the city. So Bethlehem really is walled off, even though it's 6 miles south of Jerusalem. But you've got to show your magnetic ID card or your passport or your identification papers or what have you in order to be able to go to Jerusalem or to Israel proper. And you can go to the Israeli authorities and apply for a permit to be able to go to Jerusalem or elsewhere in the country. But if you want to visit your grandmother on a Sunday, for example, that's not reason enough for Israel to give you a permit. If you need a kidney dialysis, that is not reason enough for Israel to grant you a permit. If you need to go to Jerusalem for a treatment for cancer, that's not a valid reason to ask Israel for a permit. So the permit system is always at the whim of whoever is issuing the permit, and consequently there are many people living in the Bethlehem area, and as I said, it's only 6 miles south of Jerusalem, that have no consciousness or no awareness of what Jerusalem is, especially the young people. They've never been to Jerusalem, they've never seen Jerusalem, they've never walked the streets of the old city. They have no idea of what Jerusalem is. So it's being removed from the consciousness of these young Palestinians.
I was a commissioner to that General Assembly in 2022, and there was a great backlash might be the right word, or at least sentiment that this was an action that was anti-Semitic, to call Israel an apartheid state. Can you speak to that, and also how you relate with Israeli community and Jewish community in your work, and try to build those bridges?
That type of work was much easier in the mid-90s, going into the 2000s, but still we have Jewish contacts, Israeli contacts, and in light of the events of October the 7th, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance stepped up and set aside monies for Israel, Palestine, and South Lebanon. And then I use the words empowered, and they did. They have sort of empowered me to say, reach out to the communities and offer solidarity grants. Now, I realize some people would compare this with putting a Band-Aid on a situation that needs a tourniquet. And actually, that's the truth. But at least it was a way of letting people know that we are there, we care for you, we can offer this for you now, we're trying to help you get through this very difficult period. And so solidarity grants were offered to both Israeli Palestinian organizations. Some of the Israeli organizations that we work with are Beit Tselem, and Beit Tselem is the premier Israeli human rights center that deals with what's happening in the occupied territories. And Beit Tselem is a nice Hebrew word, which means in the image of. So that's an organization that we've prided ourselves with having that relationship. They're not very well thought of in Israel because they basically are always issuing reports about what's happening, and it's sort of in your face for many Israelis, but it's the truth. They verify everything before it's published. They also have a website. You can go on and see it online, Beit Tselem, B-T-S-E-L-E-M. Another Israeli organization that we work with is called Hamoked. Hamoked in Hebrew means hotline. And this is the organization that when Palestinians are arrested, the families will contact Hamoked to find out where their loved one has been taken to, like which prison they're in, where they're located, how can we reach them, et cetera, et cetera. And another one of the organizations we've worked with for many years is called Sindiana of Galilee. Sindiana is an Israeli Arab and Israeli Jewish women's group that makes award-winning olive oil. And za'atar, somebody had za'atar for lunch today, I think, which is the biblical hyssop that's been dried and mixed with sesame seeds, and you dip it in olive oil and bread, and it's very healthy. And they do basket weaving. And as within the last year, they've trained many Israeli Arab women to become beekeepers. So they're raising bees and producing honey. And that's one of the things that we've been supporting. In terms of the churches, we immediately reached out to the churches in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, because the church leaders decided that in light of the situation and the devastation that was taking place in Gaza, it was not appropriate to hold Christmas celebrations last year. So we reached out to the churches and offered them solidarity grants in order to provide food baskets, or cash assistance, not knowing that the situation would last well into a year and beyond. But again, just providing a little bit of joy and sustainability to the small congregations of these churches.
Your most recent interview with the Presbyterian Outlook included a headline that the battle for the West Bank, or the final battle for the West Bank, has begun. Say more about that.
Yeah, and the editors actually asked me about that, and they wanted to reword it, and I said no. Quote what I said. What I meant by that is that what is happening in Gaza now, in some way, is trickling into the West Bank, in the sense that you have these very right-wing Israeli settlers who are moving into the South Hebron Hills or the Jordan Valley, and moving out the traditional Bedouin communities that have been there for decades, if not longer. They're bringing in their sheep and their goats by truckload and pretending that they're the shepherds, and then driving the indigenous Palestinians off of their lands. And then you have the outright destruction of cities such as Jenin Camp, which is in the northern part of the West Bank, and Nablus. Until now, Bethlehem has been spared, maybe because of the Christian presence, maybe because of the Church of the Nativity, I'm not sure. There are 3 refugee camps in Bethlehem, and they have been targeted, and there have been arrests made in those camps. But it really does feel, and people are even telling me, I have a Palestinian friend who said, my children are saying to me, Dad, where are we going to go when the war comes here? So that's the feeling, is that what's happening in Gaza is slowly trickling into the West Bank. You have about 1 million settlers living in the West Bank. Most of them are armed. They've been going into many of the Palestinian cities or villages and setting fire to vehicles and houses and shooting. And so it's striking terror, basically, in the hearts of the people. So this is my sense, and this is the sense that my Palestinian friends have, is, are we going to be next? And because the world has been largely silent about what's happening in Gaza, then who's going to stop them when they come here?
We heard Miko call for one state, which would mean the dismantling of the current state of Israel. That's not the Presbyterian position. As you know, we still hold on to a 2-state solution. Could you, I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I was just making a note that our first speaker, Miko, called for one state in historic Palestine that would mean the end of the current state of Israel. The Presbyterian Church is on board with a 2-state solution, which is the predominant solution that is promoted. Can you say more about the denomination's stand? There's always the question, does Israel have the right to exist? Can you speak to that? The corollary, does Palestine have a right to exist, is a secondary question to that. And how would you respond to both as I know you have to speak on behalf of the denomination with one part of yourself, and then how you personally would feel, whatever you want to say in response to that. Yeah, I mean, the easy stuff.
Some years ago, the late Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, was asked, where are the borders of the State of Israel? And he said, the borders of the State of Israel are where the Israeli army now stands, which meant south to Gaza, north on the Golan Heights, fully in the West Bank. So in other words, Israel has never officially declared its boundaries. And therein lies because official Presbyterian language says that we support a secure Israel within recognized boundaries. But where are those boundaries? What are the recognized boundaries? And the fact is the boundaries have never been declared. Israel has officially annexed the Golan Heights, and I think the United States recognizes it, but most other countries don't recognize it. Israel has never annexed the West Bank, but there's this creeping annexation that's taking place. You build a settlement here, you build a settlement there, you build a settlement here, you build a settlement there, and you cut off those Palestinian towns and enclaves. And so where is Palestine? What's left to divide? So for me personally, in the short term, I think there needs to be a separation of the two peoples. But actually that's what's taking place now, as I told you, because so many people have lost their jobs, and therefore they're not able to cross that checkpoint and go to Jerusalem or to Israel proper. And I worry about that, because then you don't have this interaction between the two peoples. So the people who live behind the wall are the terrorists, and for the Palestinians, the people who live on the other side of the wall are terrorists. So this interaction isn't taking place, and that worries me a lot. I think I would say what Miko said, that my hope would be that eventually there could be one state with equal rights for all, living in peace and security. But I think there has to be equal rights for everyone, absolutely.
Would you say there's already one state? Would you say there's already one state?
Israel is making it one state, but Israel doesn't want to give the Palestinians equal rights and doesn't want to give them citizenship. So therefore, this is the problem. As I said, it's this creeping annexation. We're slowly taking the West Bank, but we don't want to offer them citizenship. We don't want to offer them free health care. We don't want to offer them a vote and a voice in our elections, et cetera, et cetera. But absolutely, I mean, with the bypass roads that have been built in the West Bank since Oslo, I think the situation that has been created has made it impossible for separation.
Okay. I'll take a couple of questions. Nicola, and then Becky, and then I'll come over here.
Forgive me if you have answered the question. I stepped out for a moment, but it is the same question I wanted to ask Miko. When he suggested that we should all scream until the government agrees to no more weapons, wondering, not as a church official, but just personally, from what you know about the weapon production and delivery to Israel, first of all, when did it start? Did it start with the Zionists moving into Israel, that the militaries started to sell their hardware over there? That's question number one. Question number two.
Oh, she's a journalist. She's one of those people that goes to the White House and asks like 5 questions.
And the question asked, questioner. The second one is, given the power of this international trade of arms, that includes, from what I understand, Israel is actually and has been selling the arms under their own name with a couple of changes to other countries in Africa. So Biden has said, if we didn't have Israel, we would have to create it. Meaning that Israel is but a ball in the whole imperialistic politics. So is it realistic to think that only by demanding an end to selling weapons and telling those people in the government to stop the war seems kind of fertile or infertile?
Futile.
I wish fertility would be happening again. It's futile in that whole process, and wouldn't we, as citizens of the so-called us, be more effective if we really showed this network of the whole arms trade in that imperialistic endeavor?
I'm going to summarize in really quickly. So we have people who are watching online. So very quickly, responding to what Miko said about speaking up against the U.S. Providing arms to Israel. When did the U.S. start providing arms to Israel? And then second, the fact that Israel now provides arms to countries in Africa, and so there's a whole geopolitical issue going on. Anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, because the questions were good, and actually you've provoked some things in my mind, as long as I don't forget to say them. And I think Miko said it, that it was in the early 70s when it would have been later than he said the Carter administration, but I think it was earlier than that. It would have been Nixon, because the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, was when the United States began a massive airlift to Israel from Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Non-stop planes went to Israel. And if it hadn't been for that airlift, Israel may have just lost the war. They were very, very close to losing the war, number one. Number two, when October the 7th happened, who was the first person to step off the plane in Tel Aviv and offer his support? It was Joe Biden. And it wasn't only offering weapons, but they threw open the warehouses. Do you know that the United States actually maintains warehouses in Israel of weapons to be used in the Middle East? So they threw open the doors to the warehouses and said, take what you need. So who has funded and paid for and provided the weapons for this? It's not even a war, as Miko said. It's a massacre, what's happening in Gaza. But it's the United States that has funded it and paid for it and allowed it to happen. If you want statistics about Israel's arms industry, I don't have those, but I mean, it's a very flourishing industry, absolutely. And it also strikes me, this is the last thing I'm going to say, is our knowledge comes from what it is we read and what we hear and what we know and what we watch and the sources where we get that information. And I find that Israelis debate the issue of Israel, Palestine, and what's going on in their own country much better than the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. So I encourage you to pay for a subscription to Haaretz, Haaretz. This is the left-wing, center to left of center newspaper in Israel. There's an English language version online. I subscribe to it. And if you read the article, you have to read the articles, but even read the comments by Israelis and others at the end of the article. It's very telling, and it provides a lot of information. And just, I think in the last several months, there has been a story about the Israeli arms industry. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I know they would have it. So again, look for a different source of information besides what, other than ABC or CNN, or, you know, follow what Israel is watching and what they're saying about their own situation.
Becky. So the question is there any credence to the idea that perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu actually goaded Hamas into the October 7th attack in order to elevate his own status? Is there any credence to that?
You know, one of the things that disturbed me from the beginning of the events of October the 7th, and I knew it, and I said it, and I cautioned the church about it, because I did the first interview with Terry Ott then. And I said, now is not the time for statements and pronouncements, because we don't know what we don't know. So now let's just call for a time of prayer because of what happened. I don't know that Mr. Netanyahu himself goaded Hamas to do that. If you read an article by Jonathan Cook, I can't think of the name of the article now, but he basically says that October 7th came out of the decades of the torture chambers that Israel ran in the West Bank and in Israel. I mean, what they were doing to Palestinians for decades, and it finally blew up in their faces. You know, there was a lot written, and I read a lot, and I waited until almost a year before. That's why the article, when Terry Ott asked me would I agree to a follow-up interview a year later, her questions were like this, and my answers were like this. Because it had to be a teaching moment. It couldn't just be about what I thought. The last thing I want to say about that is we still don't know what we don't know, because a commission of inquiry has not been set up by this current Israeli government. Mr. Netanyahu is still in power. He's still facing corruption charges. He knows when this war or this assault on Gaza and Lebanon is finally over with, his head is going to roll. He's finished. So it's to his advantage that the hostilities continue. I'll leave it at that.
Right here, yes.
I was curious about whether you might have comments regarding the difference differences between the way the Israeli government treats Christian Arabs versus Arabs who are followers of Islam. And secondly, whether those two groups demonstrate different ways or levels of resistance against the Israeli occupation.
So again, the question for those who maybe couldn't hear and those who are online is, are Arab Christians and Arab Muslims treated differently by the Israeli government? And then sort of in a reverse question, are Arab Christians and Muslims responding differently to the occupation?
In my opinion, I don't think they're treated differently. They all have to go to the DCO, the District Coordinating Office, to get their permits. There are very few families in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, that have not had a relative incarcerated in an Israeli jail. And that began with the first Intifada, which was 1987. So in my opinion, no. I mean, Christians serve time in jail, Muslims serve time in jail. No, I don't think there's a discrimination. In my opinion, it's a shared suffering. Christians and Muslims alike have to go through those checkpoints. Christians and Muslims alike have to go and stand in the line at the district coordinating office to get those permits. So I don't think that one side is looked on more favorably than the other.
I'm sorry, we're at our time. I'm gonna ask the final question, same as I asked Miko. Is there any reason for hope in your experience?
I think you have to distinguish between hope and optimism. I'm not optimistic. In the short term, I'm not optimistic. But in the long term, I'm hopeful. Because to give up hope would be to give up a huge part of myself and my faith. And I say it repeatedly that I'm thankful for the Presbyterian Church that allowed me to stay in the region all during COVID, all during the events following October the 7th. I mean, at any given time, I was offered the opportunity to come home. But they also said, if you want to stay, check in with us from time to time, tell us you're okay, let us know you're okay, and for that I'm eternally grateful. And for me, that allows me to be the ministry of presence that shows our Palestinian and Israeli friends that we're present with them, that we didn't get on the first plane out of the country and leave. We stayed, we're here with you, we're here for you, we hear your cry, we hear your suffering, we know that there's a huge injustice, tell us what we need to do. And I know that the Palestinian Christian community is saying that all churches need to be taking, I think the term they use is costly solidarity. And I think I think they're still calling for that, is that we really have to stand up and speak and shout, as Miko said, whoever will listen to us, and continue to work so that the injustice ends and that everyone can live from the river to the sea in freedom and in peace.
Friends, we have gotten our marching orders. Costly solidarity is our next step. I want to make sure you are aware that Faye Stump, and if you don't mind just raising your hand and staying up. Faye is sort of our ringleader, and we would like to continue the conversation. So if you want to be part of a community that continues the conversation to discern together what our next steps will be, please let Faye know, and she will include you in that work. Maybe meeting monthly. We haven't figured that out yet. Yes. We don't have time for more questions of Doug. Is this a logistics-related question over there? Yes? Yes, you with the crutch, yes. Did you have a logistics-related question?
I made quickly that I'm a Palestinian Christian.
Yes, we met you about a year, yes, I remember you, yes.
So I just want to in Israel, in an Israeli prison, no charges. I didn't have the right to know what the charges against me were. And I was tortured, actually, and during the interrogation, asked to confess to all kinds of totally false things. So, to your point, Palestinian Christians, and my group, I belong to a group called Palestinian Christian Alliance for Peace, and we are about to launch a campaign that centers around two Palestinian Christian families, the Nassar family, both in the Berkeley area, which still has an active presence of Palestinian Christians, the Nassar family and the Gusti family, and both are about to lose their land to Israeli illegal settlers who actually have already started building structures on their land. So please, I'd love to share some brochures when we launch the campaign. Maybe we can pass them around.
Please remind me of your name. I'm so sorry.
Philip Farah.
Philip Farah, yes.
And another thing is that my family are originally from Gaza, three of my grandparents, and my father's church, the Church of St. Porphyrius in Gaza, was bombed. 18 Palestinian Christians died, and I lost some of my relatives, including one who was an 84-year-old woman, a music teacher who was shot by a sniper while she was leaving her church to go to her house. And others have died because of flak. They're all sheltered in these churches. All Christians now are sheltered in 2 churches in Gaza, and many are dying because of lack of medicine and food and water.
Thank you so much for sharing. For those who are online, I won't share the whole thing, but Philip Farah was just saying, he was confirming what Doug had, did I get that right? He was confirming what Doug had said, which was that he himself had been imprisoned in an Israeli jail for no reason that was shared with him, and he was tortured and was pressured to confess to things that made no sense to him. So he was just offering, but he was offering a personal experience of that, and also sharing about his family in Gaza and the Christians in Gaza who are sheltering in churches there. So on that note, please reach out to Faye. She'll be right here and taking your name and information. If you would like to continue the conversation, be part of that group. I will also let you know that the Shepherdstown Ministerial Association is hosting a week of prayer and worship starting November 3rd through November 9th, and there will be some materials as you're leaving, a flyer for that. We hope that you'll be able to join us for that. There was one more thing I wanted to say that just completely left my mind. There's a reception. Oh, of course. Reception, yummy food, and a book signing. And I also want to invite Terry Tucker to close us in prayer. Terry. Thank you, Doug.